once again to Crazy Comics and Stories. It's me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. And at the other end of the series of tubes and wires we call the internets is Joe, Crazy Writer. How you doing today, Joe?
Oh, I'm obsequious, purple and clairvoyant. Thanks for asking.
Well, it's a good day not to be in the WWE.
Oh, what happened in the WWF?
Well, let's see. They have released 3 people already today on a Sunday.
Uh-oh.
Emma, Darren Young, and Summer Rae have all been released. Emma kind of surprised me because they've been using her on Raw a lot. She was even on the last pay-per-view. Darren Young does not surprise me because we haven't really seen much of him in a long time, and I didn't even know Summer Rae still worked there.
Yep.
But
interesting.
We'll see if there's more people being shown to the wishing well. We wish them well in their future endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good day not to be in a job like that. We'll never get fired, not from this show.
Oh, I don't know. It was close. We got that untalked about 52 episode. That was pretty close.
Well, yeah, but they thought better of it after listening to episode 52 when we were replaced. I blame Glacier. You know how weird it is that we did that the same week as the new 52. And not only is our episode 52 never talked about again, but the whole new 52 just seems to have vanished off the face of the earth.
All gone. Go bye-bye.
DC, more reboots than I have for winter.
Payless shoes.
So it's been, a whole 3 days since we recorded last. What have you been up to?
We'll talk about that when we get to my eBays.
Well, this is the reason we're doing the show so close together is Joe's schedule has now changed.
Yeah. And I lost my weekends, which, I freaked about many moons ago. I still got my 3 days off, which is fine. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just like before. It's kind of a plus, kind of a minus. The plus side is Cory got a little bit more time to edit the podcast. He doesn't have to rush through it. The minus is if some really good breaking news happens that we really want to talk about, we'll be talking about it a week and a half after it happens. So.
Well, we're not where you go for your breaking news.
No, but people love our opinions because we are a treasured national institution.
We are a national treasure.
Can we say that? How many episodes have we done?
326.
Oh, excuse me. We got some eBaying going
on.
Oh,
you made some money. What sold?
Let's see what sold. SpongeBob Comics number 3 in very fine condition. Didn't I tell you, folks? You got to buy those weird tie-ins and sit on them for 5-10 years, and maybe they'll go up in value.
Well, and it also depends on if people still care about the weird tie-in, because SpongeBob SquarePants people still care about.
They do?
Beavis and Butthead? Not as much.
So much, no.
Who was it put out the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers? Was that Harvey?
I don't remember.
Gemstone?
I thought Saban did it themselves, but I'd have to look it up.
Then I'd have to know more about the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And I still remember when it first came on, my son absolutely loved it. But then when the first change happened, he hated it and never watched it again. Joe, do you remember what the change was?
Was it a change in the droids?
Yeah, the droids were no longer dinosaurs.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were, but once they weren't dinosaurs anymore, my son was like, it sucks, I hate it.
It became like a ninja. Well, they weren't all dinosaurs. I mean, there was an elephant in one of them, but it's supposed to be a mastodon. But yeah, they ran out of the original material, so they had to go on to the next season and so on and so on.
But I thought it was interesting that he watched it for the dinosaurs. Although I do remember when the show hit, and I didn't know he was watching it because he was watching it at the daycare. I didn't know he was watching it, and he said, Dad, how long till I'm a teenager? I want to be a teenager now. And I didn't understand it till there was one day I got to be home when he was watching it, and the characters talked constantly about how they were teenagers. Oh, okay, now I get it. But that Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they're doing all sorts of new stuff. We're going to be reviewing Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comic book next week, Joe.
Cool.
DC has sent us a copy of Justice League versus the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and all I could think is, who thought that was a good idea?
Well, you never know. I mean, those are the type of crossovers that get people, if you're watching Rangers, you might come over and go, hey, this Justice League is pretty good, although I don't see that happening the other way. But, again, that's something I railed about when we were talking about things we would do if we were in charge, our dream teams. And I'm like, you know what? These crossovers, they can be fun. I don't know about the Power Ranger one, but we'll find out.
Well, the other thing is, when they did the Flintstones comic book that went for 12 issues, I remember we both really liked it, but before it came out, I was like, oh, this looks stupid.
Yeah, we weren't too
there is a new comic out from the DC, the Hanna-Barbera line that I'm going to recommend.
Oh?
Rough and Ready. Have you seen the Rough and Ready, Joe?
I have not.
It is written by Howard Chaykin, and it's set in the early days of network TV in the 50s. And it's a detective story by Howard Chaykin. That should be enough right there.
A whole lot of Chaykin going on.
But that's not what we're going to talk about this week.
No.
We are going to begin a journey through the past. A journey into comic book past. A journey through the decades. We are going to do our favorite comic series through the decades. And the first decade we're going to do is the 60s, which I was going to do the 40s and the 50s, but then I realized that I would have ideas and Joe would just be sitting there staring at the wall.
Well, and it was pretty damn close in the 60s, too, because, I started reading late 70s, early 80s, and the problem was when you go back and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to read the 60s. When I was starting to read comics, even then, they were expensive. They were hard to get. The idea, when I collected, I started with 178, and I was able to get Spider-Man back to 129. And after that, they got so expensive, I stopped buying. And 129 was expensive in itself because it was the first Punisher. I was able to read some of it. My then buddy and weekend warrior friend, Pat Gruber, future partner with me in Hot Comics, he borrowed me a Spider-Man, and I was able to read through the ones he had. But even he didn't have them. We didn't have the reprints you kids have nowadays. We didn't have Marvel Unlimited. We didn't have Essentials. We didn't have different ways to find stuff. There weren't cons, there weren't eBays, there weren't Amazon. I was stuck with what I could find at my local comic shop. And the fun thing was I was aware of a lot of it, but until the Essential lines, I really didn't get to read all of it. And when I did finally get to read some of it, and Showcase through DC, and when I started to read it, a lot of it was really bad. It was like, oh, man, the Silver Age is so great, blah, blah, blah. And I started reading, and I was like, But nevertheless, there are some series, and I've talked about it in past, pocketbooks have the little tiny reprints of some of the series I'm going to talk about, and that's how I was exposed to it. And after about, what are we going to do, about 10 of them maybe?
Yep.
And after about issue, 5 series, it became less of, I bought this series because I want to read it, but I bought it for other reasons. And I'll talk about that. As you know, I'm want to take a concept Cory does and kind of twist it to make the show work. So, but we'll see when we get to that. So
well, for me, when I started reading in the 70s, because I read before, but I was just reading Archie and Disney, and I read kids comics until 75. For me, I started reading in the golden age of reprints because Marvel was trying to squeeze everybody off the shelf. So you had Marvel Tales, and Marvel's Greatest Comics, and Marvel Triple Action, and Marvel Super Action, and Marvel Spectacular, and Marvel Adventures, and they were all reprinting stuff from the 60s. And then you had the giant size, which if they weren't new, they were reprinting the annuals from the 60s. So it's, giant size Daredevil, reprinted Daredevil Annual #1. Or Giant Size Captain America reprinted 3 of the Captain America stories from the 60s. So, as I was reading Marvel, I kind of knew about the stuff from the Silver Age. And every so often they'd reprint something from the Golden Age, like in the Human Torch series. They were reprinting the stuff from Strange Tales, but they'd also throw in a Golden Age Human Torch story, and I would look at the Golden Age Human Torch story and go, oh my God, this is so crude and weird, and I don't know if I like it or not. And I imagine a lot of people thought the same way when they were reading the Silver Age stuff in the 80s and 90s, going, oh, this is so weird, I don't know if I like it.
Even, I'm trying to think of the magazines we had back then, but, Comic Buyer's Guide kind of guided me some. Comic Reader, Amazing Heroes. I wasn't really into Comics Journal until later. But even when I got the Overstreet, for a while there, I bought the Overstreet every year just to look at prices and stuff. And one of the gifts I gave myself with my money that I got from graduating high school is I bought myself an Uncanny X-Men #1. And it was probably very good, maybe fine. Years later, I traded it for a bunch of Golden Age and Carlton stuff, and I was sitting there thinking, it probably wasn't a good trade. But then when Golden Age exploded, I was like, ooh, that's kind of cool. But I was aware of earlier issues. I mean, my goal when I first started buying comics was to have one of every Marvel Silver Age, knowing that I'd probably never find Golden Age because, again, you were kind of locked into the comic book shop that you could get to. And I couldn't even get across town to go to the legendary Comic City. Ooh, a city full of comics, which, as I found the history of later, wasn't really so legendary. But
well, now it's been around long enough it's legendary.
Yeah, pretty much, mostly because of the alleged malfeasance of the owner. But just the whole thing of, like, how did you become aware of the Golden Age and the Silver Age is really a big part of it as well.
But I thought that we could go through our favorite comics from the 60s. And I am going to start with number 10. And this, I got to be honest, this was kind of hard for me. Because I could have just said Kirby all the way. But
anything Kirby.
But I'm going to start. Number 10 was Doctor Strange by Lee and Ditko. And if you've read that Doctor Strange omnibus that has more than the Lee Ditko stuff that goes past that, you can see that really this was Ditko's show. It had Ditko's probably his best artwork of his career. I know there are people who will argue and say Amazing Spider-Man was better, but for me this was Ditko's best artwork. And it was really clear after Ditko left that Stan Lee had no idea what to do with the character, because Ditko turned it into this big, sprawling action adventure story that I think the Doctor Strange versus Dormammu that went for month after month after month after month was just incredible. Especially the entire sequence where Doctor Strange is pretty much beaten down and is being chased across the world by Dormammu's people and Baron Mordo. Just reading that omnibus again. Oh, it is so fun.
Yeah. I'm going to ditto you on that one because this is one of the series that, what I look at when I'm thinking 60 series that I want to read again and again. And again, I originally read it in the small paperback. I have it currently in the Essentials. I wasn't in my omnibus phase back then, but I wish I had bought it in that. And, that run was just amazing because now it's like everybody, oh, Doctor Strange has a problem. Well, maybe I'll call Thor, see if he can help. Spider-Man's around. Of course, when he pulled in Spider-Man, that was kind of fun. But just he's being chased by these wraiths. He can't openly be out in the open because these things will see him, and he's pretty much being chased on his own. He can see the wraiths, nobody else can. He doesn't even know who Dormammu is, and he gets a lead on, well, I have to go find this entity called Eternity. He'll help me against, right now we say Eternity, we know who he is. Dormammu, we know who he is. You miss some of the fun back then when it was you had no idea who these people were. And even for me, just reading it in the pocketbooks, this was all new to me. I mean, Doctor Strange was currently being published, and I think I started picking it up. Again, I'd have to look up to see where we were in like the 80s. But this was all new to me, and it was just fantastic. I was aware of who Doctor Strange was. I've talked before about how Dynamite Magazine in the 70s would do a little bit about, here is this character, and they reprint the origin issue with a question-answer period. So that's how I became aware of Spider-Man. That's how I became aware of Doctor Strange, who they were. And then for a while, they eventually did it with the villains. So that was kind of how I got exposed to a lot of these early stories, and the pocketbook was just beautiful. Definitely worth picking up, and that's why on my top 10, Doctor Strange with Lee Ditko also has a spot.
For me, number 9 is a DC series, and really the only DC series, because Joe talked about how when he read the Silver Age stuff, it didn't hit him. For me, the DC stuff from the 60s just doesn't work. It's very clear to me that it's aimed at kids. It's the stories are either goofy like the Superman stuff, or they're the Julie Schwartz puzzle stories where there's a puzzle that the character needs to figure out, and once he does, that's the solution. But there was one series that, in my mind, in the 60s at DC really stood out, and that was Dead Man by Neil Adams. And he is coming back to it. And one of the problems, I think, with Dead Man is the hook of the series. The hook of the series. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm going to pan that joke.
There is a circus trapeze artist who is killed by an assassin who has a hook for a hand. However, he is given power to kind of jump into people's bodies after he's died in order to figure out who killed him. And the mystery gets pretty convoluted, and they've had solutions, and then they said, no, that's not the solution, and it's had endings and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that first run in the 60s by Neil Adams, it was really his first series. His artwork is, you could tell why everybody wanted to draw like Neil Adams in the 70s after reading this. But again, like Doctor Strange, the story kept going and kept opening up to bigger and bigger worlds, adding more and more to it. The other thing I liked, which I'm kind of surprised DC did, was that Boston Brand, the lead character, started out not being likable at all. When he was alive, he was an asshole. And the other part of not just him searching for his killer, but also searching to be a better person, is driving the series. And for DC, characterization was pretty thin, which is why this really stands out. It's been reprinted quite a few times. I've bought it every time because it's Neil Adams art, and Neil Adams takes over the writing pretty quickly. So I really like the book. Joe?
I'm going to steal one off your list because this is next on your list, so I'm going to talk about it. But, my first comic book was Spider-Man. My first exposure to the early Lee Ditko Spider-Man, again, were in the pocketbooks, and they did 3 of them, which was phenomenal because, I think I got I didn't get the whole run. I don't think I got to where he went to college yet. But, again, that Lee Ditko Spider-Man was fantastic. So I'm reading Spider-Man. He's in college, at 178. He's fighting the Green Goblin. And Lord help me, I don't know why I knew who Harry Osborn was. I was vaguely aware his dad was the original Green Goblin. I knew about the Gwen Stacy thing. So as I'm reading this stuff, he's back. And I was able to get the back issues. I don't know if I got the 179, the big reveal that this Harry Osborn wasn't Harry, it was his doctor. But you were able to go back, and I was able to fill in the back issues fairly quick, so I got the whole story. And then a few issues later, he graduates college. So, I'm going all the way back to him in his high school days with Lee and Ditko, and the art was fabulous. The stories were fun. A lot of it was done in one. You're seeing his first exposure to the villains, the first exposure to a lot of this. And what made it even more interesting, 180 Amazing Spider-Man is like a big recap issue, which recaps the whole story up to that point. And I forget the catalyst to doing it. They did the same thing in X-Men right after the death of Phoenix, where they recap all the X-Men. So it's like I already know the characters. I know the story. Now I can go back and read it. And, yeah, I'm reading it in a little tiny format, and I wouldn't read them until a much bigger format years later. But just so groundbreaking. He had troubles. You had no idea where his next meal was coming from. Aunt May was perpetually sick. He was feeling guilty. His friends were assholes. He was an asshole. He was, Betty Brant misunderstood. Liz Allen started hitting on him. The fight with him and Flash was kind of fun. He's like, okay, I figured out how to knock out Flash without killing him. And then Flash turns his head and bam, boo, Parker, you hit him on when he wasn't looking. It's like he just can't win. And it was just a lot of fun. A bonus was when, of course, in that first issue, he went to go try to join the Fantastic Four, which, again, led to another thing, a what-if issue I was aware of. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? And I went crazy trying to find that back issue forever. Again, no eBays, no Amazon, no. I had one friendly neighborhood comic shop. I'm 12 years old. If I had a bus, I had the bus to get anywhere I needed to go, or a bike or whatever. So it led into more things. And to actually get to read the originals was fantastic. It was a real treat for a 12 to 15-year-old kid. And even now, I've pulled out my essentials and let my daughters read them, and they are loving them. So even all these years later, the original, they still got something in that magic. Now that I've kind of taken the win, Corey, you have it down as number 8.
Yes, I do have it down as number 8 for all the things that you talked about, but also for the fact that this was kind of this and the Fantastic Four were really kind of what made Marvel what they are, which were heroes with problems. If you went over to DC, whatever problem anybody had was resolved within 16 pages. With Spider-Man, he was always broke. Aunt May was always sick. He couldn't get people to like Spider-Man. J. Jonah Jameson may be one of the best characters ever in comics. The Rogues Gallery. Just the Rogues Gallery of Spider-Man in those first 36 issues. Think about that. And how they've just cruised off that for decades. And again, Ditko's art. It was very different from the Kirby style. It was very different from anything else out there. Ditko is one of those artists who, like him or not, you recognize his art immediately. And I think that his art gave Spider-Man that weird outsider quality that has made the character very popular. Whereas when Johnny Romita or Ross Andrew or Gil Kane drew him later, it didn't seem so weird. Spider-Man kind of became cuddly. But you go back to those Ditko issues, Spider-Man looks weird. He looks odd. He looks out of place. The criminals look strange. Go back in that second issue of Amazing Spider-Man where he fights the Vulture. The Vulture is such a weird character. He's an angry old man. There aren't any other villains who are angry old men. It was so innovative at the time. And one of the problems we have is looking back, that's the mainstream now. But back then, it was so different from anything else out there. And like Joe said, I still remember when the first Essential came out, my son grabbed mine. And I had to buy a new one because he wouldn't... It stayed in his room. It was his at that point. I had to buy myself one because here's this kid in 1996 hooked on stories from 1960 to 63, 64. There's just some sort of power to those stories that still stays and is still very readable. Joe?
Oh, I'm going to take the next one, Fantastic Four. I wish I could remember the progression. I was a big Marvel guy, and I wish I could remember what the next comic series was I popped into. And the very, very last one I remember was X-Men. I remember, and I've talked in the past, I picked up an X-Men issue that had Spider-Man in it. I think it was the Murder World Saga. And this is John Byrne, Chris Claremont eras. I actually found an X-Men 30, I believe it was, that had Spider-Man in it way back in... I was at Downtown Shinders, and I picked it up. And I picked it up just because I'm a Spider-Man fan. He's with X-Men. And, I realized, okay, it's the college era. He actually had a motorbike, whatever. So I was able to read a lot of Fantastic Four because my cousin, who gave me the first comic book that I ever read, and, of course, Amazing Spider-Man 178, he let me read his Fantastic Four, and his collection was very scattered. So I'd be reading, I'd read the Impossible Man issue where he comes to Earth and wants to have his own Marvel comics. And then he didn't have the next issue. And I read the first 3 run up to 200 of the Fight to Dr. Doom, and he didn't have issue 200. And so it was a very hit or miss because everything back then was a soap opera. Right now, everything seems to be like a 6-issue arc. Back then, everything was a soap opera. So the story would go on to the next one. The subplots would continue. And you could never be sure when you'd actually get to the end of a story. Or worse, the next story would start trying to get you to buy the next issue. I didn't really buy Fantastic Four until John Byrne jumped around. And even then, I was able to go back and fill in runs up to it. I think there was actually a crossover with Amazing Fantasy. Wasn't it when Amazing Spider-Man. It's when he lost his job at the Bugle, and they said, be sure to watch this issue of Fantastic Four, and he ends up going to the Daily Globe to get a job. And Spider-Man shows up there in a Fantastic Four comic. So even then, there are crossovers that are trying to get you to buy it. Again, I picked up all the pocket books that Marvel and Pocket published. So I got the Hulk, I had Captain America, I had, I think they did 2 Fantastic Four, and that's how I got exposed to Lee and Kirby's Fantastic Four. I knew the characters, I knew this was the beginning, I knew they run into Doctor Strange. I love how they didn't have costumes in the first issue, they had money problems, they went bankrupt. They had to go to a studio that they found out was owned by the Submariner, which, again, I have no idea what he did with it, but, it popped up here and there in different plots later on. So it was kind of an ego boost as a kid. You run across an issue where, Submariner's talking about owning a studio. Hey, I remember reading that from Fantastic Four pocket books, Again, these were just groundbreaking. My first exposure to Kirby, I bought some 70s Kirby Captain Americas, and I was like, ooh, something happened to the artwork. It wasn't the same. I didn't like the Kirby's 70s versus what he had done in the 60s. And, hey, I was a kid. I didn't know what the hell was going on. And even now, some of those Kirby stories in the 70s aren't readable, but the art's really nice. And to see the original stuff again back in the Fantastic Four was fun. And there's a lot of it, too. I mean, Lee and Kirby go up to, what's the last issue there?
103, I believe.
3, and then they did the...
No, 102. 102.
Didn't they do a 103 issue, the issue that was never done? So there's a lot more Lee and Kirby to read. It was fun to just watch the style as it changed, especially when they getting more cosplay. The first Silver Surfer, the first Galactus, all these issues. I swear, they got those memes on computers say, what would you tell yourself in 3 words if you could go back in time? Mine, don't sell anything. Because I had all these key issues before they became super, super expensive. Now, of course, I can get them Marvel Unlimited. I've got my Essentials and Omnibus. I'm pretty sure they're doing an Epic line. So, again, the Fantastic Four rates right on there, the list for me. Corey, what's your next?
The next I have is, let's see, number 6 and 7 are pretty close to being the same thing, but there are subtle differences. And it's the run of Creepy, edited by Archie Goodwin, and the run of Eerie, edited by Archie Goodwin. This is one of those books that when I pick up the Overstreet Price Guide, I'm just kind of baffled why these magazines/comics aren't worth more than they are. Because they started around the same time as Spider-Man. The stories by Goodwin are head and shoulders above most anything else in comics. He was doing comics for adults back in the early 60s. And the art lineup at those early issues, it was a murderer's row. I mean, you had EC artists. You had Ditko working for him. You had Wally Wood working for him. You name the premier artists from the 60s, and they were working on this run of Creepy and Eerie that was not just edited by Archie Goodwin, but he wrote pretty much every story during his first editorial run. And I would not have known about them without the Dark Horse reprints. I'd always heard that they were really good. That's weird because okay, the numbers are moving. Yeah, I kept calling you and nothing was happening.
Yeah, that was not an interwebs problem. That was something with Skype.
Okay. And then I called the, what is it called? The Echo... Echo sound test service to make sure that nothing was wrong on my end, and everything on my end was fine.
Yeah.
You're on drugs. Your computer's on drugs.
Yeah, I hate downloads.
You need to be on drugs.
All right, last thing I heard you were talking about Wally Wood.
Yes, so the Creepy and Eerie stuff, probably some of the best comics ever. And out of the 60s, kind of a recent addition for me for the stuff I love from the 60s, because until Dark Horse started reprinting it, it wasn't out there. And the only reason I can think that the back issues aren't worth as much, first, they were magazine size and not comic size. And second, all up through into the early 80s, you could still order those issues from Warren magazines. And they didn't cost that much because Warren had, tons of them in the warehouse. And then when Warren's magazines kind of went away and nobody knew where he was, they dumped all that stuff on the New York market. So tons of the Warren stuff ended up at Midtown Comics and all the other New York comic shops for, they were able to get it wholesale. So, but hopefully soon people will start to see and understand just how important those books were. Joe, what's your next one?
I'm going off the superhero trend because this is one of my favorite series. I don't own it at the moment, but I've owned it off and on. I like The Monkees from Dell. It was published from 67 to 68, and it's based very close on the TV series. It's got very awesome photo covers in mint shape. They are really, really hard to find, really expensive. And basically, if you like the mayhem and the silliness of the TV show, the comic series actually does quite well in I can't even say it.
Adapting.
Thank you. The TV show. A lot of the crossovers and other things. There's like a paperback, Monkeys Go Mod, and there are a couple of big books. Most of the time you hit a crossover or an adaptation, it doesn't really work. But this one actually works really well. I am utterly gobsmacked that with all the monkey stuff being out and reissued and re-released, that nobody's thought to take these 17 issues and republish them in some type of omnibus form, be it expensive or cheap. I don't know if it's a rights thing. I don't even know who would own the rights. I mean, I don't have an issue to look at, but it says Dell Publishing Company owns it. But do they really own the monkeys and the likeness within it? Or is this just something nobody's thought about? So,
is there any way to know who drew that?
They got an artist. Not everyone's listed. They got Mo Marcus listed as number 1. Jose Delbo did a bunch of issues between 4 and 11. But yeah, you just never know. I don't know why they don't reprint this. It's just a fun thing. I mean, if you're a Monkees fan, this is one you should probably go. You could probably find cheap copies, because one of the reasons why, of course, a lot of comics in this era are as expensive as they are because nobody thought to keep them in good shape. So trying to find a near mint one of number 1, which would set you back maybe $200, that might be a little tough, but you might be able to find one in good or fair shape just for reading. And like I said, I've collected them all. I don't have any at the moment. Pretty much just bought them to read and to have. What's next on your list?
What's next on my list is another non-superhero book. And
I sense an exciting new trend.
Yeah. It is Nancy, the Nancy comic book, which was done by John Stanley, who had finished up his run on Little Lulu. And Dell/Gold Key got the rights to Nancy, and he did a Nancy comic book, which I know there are a lot of artists who worship Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy strip for being, the essence of simplicity. The stuff that he drew was very iconic. But John Stanley brought over those concepts and ideas and that wonderful way of looking at childhood that he used on Little Lulu. He created extra characters for the comic book that weren't in the comic strip. He broadened out the world, but mostly it's just because this was the book John Stanley was doing in the 60s. No matter what book John Stanley was doing, it was going to be fun, it was going to be clever, it was going to be funny. And the fact that Gold Key kind of went away in the 70s is a shame, because his last idea after the Nancy comic went away was a comic that I loved called O.G. Whiz, which was about a little kid who owned a toy factory. And he didn't bring over a lot of the concepts that he'd played with in the past, but it was still very clever and very funny for a kid's comic, but still well done enough and enjoyable for somebody who was not a kid anymore. But those Nancy books have been reprinted by Drawn and Quarterly, because I remembered reading them as a kid. And then I would look at the comic strip and go, well, this comic strip's stupid. It's nothing like the comic book. The comic book's so much better. And now that I've got the books, it's like, oh, that's why I love John Stanley, because I also was a big fan of Little Lulu when I was a kid. Joe?
I'm going back superhero trend, and this is where I depart from series, because I'm looking at the Justice League of America. How earlier we made the comment, it does not hold up that well. But as I started reading it, and I think the first one I read was when Zatanna got her new bodysuit costume.
Ugh.
Yeah. And but
way to ruin a character.
Wasn't it Prez Art? I don't remember.
No, I think it was before that.
Yeah, but there was that's when I started doing it. Now, again, I don't know why, but I do recall earlier issues, and so I went and I seeked them out, or I should say sought them out. For example, the JLA 21 to 22. And, of course, I can ask Cory, as we mini asked Strode, what's significant about those?
Was that the Crisis on Earth Whatevers?
Yep, that's where they met the Justice Society for the first time. And there's a little rube that I played on Gruber years ago. back when I went to one of the cons in St. Cloud, we were both looking at these books because they were in really nice shape. And I ended up buying them from a dealer. I think his name was John. He owned Granite City at the time. He's the guy who sold Granite City to Tim and Dave. Hey. So I think they were about $50 a pop. But, you know, Pat didn't want to pay $50 because he was always looking to do a deal. And so I told John, I said, why don't you come over and say that you're tired of holding them, and I'll give you like $20 for both of them. And he came over later, Pat and I are behind our table. He goes, yeah, you know, I'm getting tired of these books. Joe, give me $20 for both of them. Oh, okay. And you should have seen Pat's face like, oh, what? Because I'm sure that was never even a deal that Pat thought of. And I don't think I ever told. Actually, I should say I did finally let Pat in on the rube when he did buy them for me years later. And he was like, yeah, you only paid $20 for both. I said, no, Pat, that was a rube. I paid $50 a piece for them. Ah, you guys are mean. always having fun with Pat. Again, 29 and 30, another crisis, another crossover. I enjoyed picking up the 80 pagers, 48, 58, 67. I never picked up number 64. It was the first Red Tornado, but they were always ones that I wanted to pick up because characters came, characters went. You knew, because they did a wonderful job usually I mean, JLA was its own little universe. It didn't really tie into the rest of the universe, which is why you could wonder, well, if Superman was so busy in outer space, how did he have time to actually hang out with the Justice League of America? But I picked up those key issues whenever I could find them just to read them. Now, of course, I have the showcase run, or at least I think I do. I don't remember. I know I read them all when I had the archive series, which I've since sold off. That's a common theme of what I do. I buy it and sell it. So, yeah, those Justice League of America runs in the 60s. They were not everything, because not every run was good. And for the reasons that we talked about. But I was real curious when characters came, when characters went. Like I had one that I was really into was, like the first appearance of Fathom Stranger when he became a member of the Justice Society. Justice League. And, I found out about this as I was going back reading issues, and you'd see every time he shows up, hey, it's the Phantom Stranger, our sometime member of the society. And then it would say, for his first appearance, go back to this issue. So it was like they roadmapped me into back issues, which I'm sure the shops around the time really appreciated. You don't see that much anymore. I don't know, maybe that's something they should do in the letter column. Kurt Busiek did that in his Avenger run. He would always say, yeah, the last appearance, here's where you go to find these. Try to get people interested in reading the older comics. But, on the other hand, back issue sales really don't drive any sales for the current regime. In the case of New 52, anything pre-New 52 doesn't matter. And, for Marvel, some of that stuff, I don't know if they really want to be referring to issues, that are 50 years old.
I always thought it was, when I was reading Roy Thomas's stuff in the 70s, he was referring to, Marvel Comics number 12.
Oh, yeah, they're doing the...
And I was like, I can't ever afford that. And now I think, that was a 30-year-old comic back then. And now we're referring to stuff that's 60, 70, and 80 years old.
I always like when they talk about how, Stan Lee would suggest, since there was a mistake in your mint copy of Fantastic Four number 4, to go out and rip out the offending pages and put in the replacement pages instead. But yeah, certain runs on JLA, I do have. I think I have the showcase, almost all of it now. But, just those key issues, and then, of course, a lot of it was stoked by Crisis, too, because people were like, this is the first Crisis, this ties into this, so you'd run out and find it, and, of course, the back issue, that would make the back issue market go up. And then some of the fun, you read about it, again, in Overstreet, where they talk about the history of, this was the first crossover, this is the first appearance, this is where this character appeared. So, just fun stuff, bits and pieces out of Justice League of America.
Next one I have is S.H.I.E.L.D. by Lee Kirby and Sternenko. I know I'm mispronouncing it.
Yeah, you're channeling me now.
But it started as Lee and Kirby doing their version of James Bond using the character of Nick Fury, which they had in the Nick Fury's Howling Commandos. And then here comes Jim Sternenko to just blow everybody out of the water with kind of his very cinematic way of telling stories. He started as a Kirby clone, and those early issues, it just looks like Jack Kirby on a bad day. But, boy, it didn't take long before he started just revolutionizing how to tell comic stories and how to lay out a page and putting in all sorts of very 60s designs and really pushing comic layout pages into new ideas. And it's a shame that he did so few comics over the years. But I just got the omnibus of this one. And, yeah. You know, Lee and Kirby are having a lot of fun, but then this series just goes into a different lane. And this is some amazing comics. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't get reprinted as much, but I think it's because when they put Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. in their own book in the 60s, it sputtered and died pretty quick. Joe?
I mentioned earlier Phantom Stranger, and that was actually one of the books that I enjoyed in the 60s as well. Now, the original Phantom Stranger had, was it a 5 or 6 issue series back in the 50s? And he was more of a, kind of like the creepy crypt taker, you know, just kind of narrating the stories, not really involved. And this one really is kind of a cheat because only 4 issues came out in '69. The rest of them came out in the 70s, and it really didn't start kicking in until it started up into the 20s, and they stopped the formula format. And I remember talking with Cory about this when I picked up my again a showcase of Phantom Stranger, and I couldn't get through it because the story format was pretty much the same. You know, especially when Dr. 13 showed up. Phantom Stranger would come in, Dr. 13 would yell at him, Phantom Stranger would stop the villain, Dr. 13 wouldn't believe it, and then on to the next issue. And again, when you've got months between issues, and they were published every 2 months, it will probably held up a little better. But when you're doing it, trying to read it in a storyline, it really got old really fast. And then as it got up into the 20s and into the 30s, it actually started more of an actual comic book where the stories would continue on there. The first 4, fairly expensive, hard to find in decent shape. And the actual 1, 2, and 3 reprint stuff from the original Phantom Stranger. So they weren't exactly covering new ground, especially in 1 and 2, because they like the Phantom Stranger reprinted from Phantom Stranger 1, Dr. 13 reprinted from Star Spangled Comics 125, rinse, lather, repeat for 2 and 3. Number 4 was the first appearance of Tala, who becomes like a major thorn in Phantom Stranger's side. And like I said, it's kind of a cheat because just 4 issues published in the 60s, but it's always been one of my favorite characters. I even will follow along with what they're doing in the 52, although he hasn't shown up in a while. He's kind of a hard character to really write for. He works more as just like when he shows up, kind of like in the JLA Avenger thing. He just, or somewhat ally, he advances the plot point and then disappears,
We're at number 3.
3.
And believe it or not, this is not a Jack Kirby-ish series. It's The Silver Surfer by Stan Lee and John Buscema. I know that Kirby was kind of mad when Buscema was given this book, but I still think that this was a better choice because John Buscema knocked himself out on the art. This still is probably his best non-Conan art. And Lee let loose with his very... These are the stories that for years Stan Lee said were his best writing. To the point where in the 70s, if you wanted to use the character the Silver Surfer, you actually still had to go to Stan for special permission. And up until like about 84, 85, Stan said, don't start a series, I'm going to be the one to write it. Eventually Stan realized he was never going to be able to come back and do a regular series. Oh, wait, he did Ravager 2099, didn't he? Yeah. But The Silver Surfer was a double-sized book. It was John Buscema just laying his heart on the line with each issue. And Stan really doing putting his philosophy on the page, where the Surfer talked about what was good about mankind, but always being disappointed in them. And this was, in a lot of ways, I think you could call this the kind of the pinnacle of Stan Lee's writing. This was, after this, he started stepping away from writing after this series didn't succeed. And it was reprinted a few times. I have it in the, I have the Essential, but I also have the two Masterworks that reprint everything. And if you're looking for 60s Stan Lee, this is kind of like peak Stan Lee. So really enjoyed this stuff, and it's number 3 on my list. Joe?
Let's see. Number 3 on my list is Dell 4-Color Comics. Dell is what we've talked in the past, printed oodles of comics, most of them in the 50s. And for the longest time, I loved picking up the photo covers, especially if it was something of a series I recognized or if it was somebody famous on the cover. And I'm just going to cover a few of them that I picked up. For example, 77 Sunset Strip from January 1960. I can't even say his name. Samuel Blast Jr.? Whatever. I just recognized the show. I picked up copies of the Real McCoy that were published various times during the 60s. No idea. I'd never seen the show, never seen the movie series. That was always a phrase of, these are the Real McCoys. Oh, that must be what this is based off of. Rawhide had some guy, Eric Fleming, and then some hack actor, Clint Eastwood. He probably went on to do nothing. But May 1960, Bonanza, which I believe was wasn't that the no, that was a prequel to Battlestar Galactica, if I remember right. And then there was Walt Disney, Absent-Minded Professor, again from the movie. This one I bought while I was out in Washington, D.C. I stopped at Aftertime Comics in Alexander, Virginia, and I picked it up because, well, first it reminds me of being out there, but second of all, the cover shows the National Mall. And what's interesting, it's before the Air and Space Museum was built. So it's actually kind of an interesting view of what the mall looked like before they popped up a lot more of the buildings. In February 62, I picked up a copy. I wasn't there in 62. I wasn't, I think my dad was dating Mom at the time. But anyways, The Detectives. Cory, do you remember who later on, who was in The Detectives that later on we'd hear about?
Well, I know the movie The Detectives, wasn't that the Frank Sinatra movie, or was that The Detective?
No, that might have been The Detective. This is Detectives, the TV show.
Oh, then no, I don't know.
Oh, Adam West.
Oh.
Beautiful Adam West on the cover, and that's why I picked it up. There was like Car 54, Where Are You? That had Fred Gwynne in it, who later, I sang his name right, later become, on the Munsters. Sometimes I'd pick up something, again, I see Mickey Rooney, I see Buddy Hackett on the cover, 1962 movie called Everything's Ducky. Never seen the movie. I have a chance to do it. I see it pop up every so often. But I was just really big on the photo covers, and it continued, and we'll cover it on a later one of my picks when we get into some of the Gold Key ones. A lot of the photo covers were in the 50s that I'd pick up, but again, I just see it. Finding mint copies of these things is impossible. The other thing is when you go inside, the best part of them, a lot of these were the covers because they didn't have the license to use the likeness of the actors. So a lot of times you go in and it's like, whoever's drawing this isn't drawing any. I mean, this looks nothing like Buddy Hackett, but you know who it is just because of the movie and the characters. Sometimes it's a straight up adaptation. Sometimes it's its own, and especially in case of a TV show, it's its own run. And it's kind of Dell went for a long time. People don't really call them 4-color. If you go to the price guide, that's how you find them because everything did have a number. And they were up in the thousands before they finally just stopped publishing them and ceded it to Gold Key. But Dell, some of the Dell 4-colors in the 60s, there was Disney ones. I mean, I just concluded the photo covers because I love collecting photo covers. But, I mean, there's Yogi Bear, there's some Uncle Scrooge. So a lot of good collecting there from Dell.
My number 2 series is one that I would say 5 years ago I would not have had in my top 10, but I have since been able to read them, and that's Thor by Lee and Kirby. For all the love the Fantastic Four has gotten and deserves, Thor did not get a lot of reprints. And Thor was, after Kirby left, Thor really kind of tumbled down the charts in a lot of ways. I did not know that in the 60s Thor was Marvel's 3rd best-selling comic. But it was. And now that I've got the Essentials and the Omnibuses, I've been able to read that entire run. And while I think there's more magic in the Fantastic Four, the Thor run by Lee and Kirby is still phenomenally good. It's action and Kirby's creativity and Stan Lee's way over-the-top dialogue. And I think the early issues suffer from the fact that after the first couple issues, Lee and Kirby both left, and other creators did it. But then when Kirby came back, the book began to hit on all cylinders. And I still think that 4-part Mangog story is the best Marvel action story ever done, where Mangog is coming for the Odin sword, and Thor does everything he can to stop him and can't. But yeah, that's some good reading, and if you have not read those, that's I almost want to call it a hidden gem, because again, Fantastic Four's been reprinted over and over and over. Amazing Spider-Man's been reprinted over and over and over. Thor never really was. So there are a lot of people that would be new Silver Age Lee and Kirby that they've never read. So jump on that, fanboy.
I talked a little bit about the Gold Key books, and there's a few of them that I mentioned. Because they kind of different. Gold Key didn't really do the 4-color numbering. They went into their own series. One of the big ones I picked up was Star Trek. Again, photo covers, number 1 through 9. This is 1967, with number 6 coming out in 69. And this is a case where, and we've laughed about it in the past, you go inside, and I don't think the guys who were drawing this had any clue what Star Trek was. They have rockets coming out of the ship lands on the planet.
Well, it was done by Italian artists.
Yeah, they had trees.
Never watched the show. Yeah,
they had trees germinating with Kirk. I don't know. It was just, but the photo covers were fun, and I've got these all in a reprint. They did a disc a while back that I picked up at Half Price Book for $10 that has everything through Wildstorm, which is really, including, I think that's the Marvel run.
Yep. It's got all of it.
Yeah, so I mean that's some good reading there. Another Gold Key run was Dark Shadows. Again, 1 through 3 were in 69. They had photo covers up to 7. And this is kind of, well, I'll talk more about this on my final pick too, because there's some stories behind it. But just runs like that. If it had a photo cover, I picked it up. The Dark Shadows was I couldn't really tell you because I didn't watch Dark Shadows as a show. I mean, when I started picking it up when it was hot, I think the Ben Cross series was on Friday nights, which is really a dumb night for a show like that. So people were Dark Shadows started to get revival, and of course I picked it up because my girlfriend's ma liked Dark Shadows, so I could go, hey, look at this. This is kind of cool, isn't it? She was apparently in love with, was it
Barnabas Collins?
Yeah. Yeah. He's just a bad boy. She knew she could tame him. Here's my neck. Take a bite. So, but yeah, I bought these when they were hot. I sold them when they were hot. And unfortunately, the guy sold them through. I don't know if he ever did sell them because when he got them, it was cooling off. So
no longer hot.
No longer hot. Not good. Again, another run that, they've reprinted the Star Trek run. I'm assuming. I don't have the reprints nearby me, but I'm assuming those are owned by the original copyright holders. So, why not pop out an omnibus on those? I'm sure there's some of us. They did reprint these, didn't they?
I'll look if they did or not.
I'm going to look that up while you tell us your next pick here.
My next pick is my final pick, and that is Lee and Kirby's Fantastic Four is the best comic of the 60s, in my opinion. Joe talked about it earlier, and he talked about the really early issues where Lee and Kirby kind of went out of their way to go, all right, we're going to do heroes with problems. They run out of money. They bicker. They fight. The Thing is a monster. The Human Torch acts like a teenage kid and not a teenage sidekick. And those issues are fun. And the funny thing is, you can kind of tell when comic creators talk about their love of the Fantastic Four, what era they like best, by what they talk about. When John Byrne talks about it, he talks about those really early issues. When Walt Simonson talks about it, he talks about the heart of the series that I enjoy, from the Inhumans till him. And he talks about that being his best, the best X-Men, the best Fantastic Four comics. And they're really, I read a book that analyzed the entire run, and it talked about how there are three distinct eras. There's the original era, there's the cosmic era, and then there's the final era where the series had matured and Kirby had said he wasn't going to give any more new characters to Marvel, so they just played with the old concepts. And each of those eras have something wonderful about them. Kirby's art gets better and better as the series goes on. When they added Joe Sinnott as the inker, it became the best drawn comic being printed and maybe the best comic ever printed. And if you're a comic book fan, even if you're not a superhero fan, you need to pick up the Fantastic Four. It's a must-read series. Lee and Kirby did 102 issues, and I'm not going to say that every one of them's a classic, but every one of them is readable and enjoyable. And that is my favorite comic of the 60s. Joe?
All right, just to follow up, apparently there is a Dark Shadows book. It collects materials from various ones called The Best of Dark Shadows. There is something called the Dark Shadows, the original series story digest, which a few issues were published. By few, I mean one. Not terribly expensive, so for you Dark Shadow fans, it might be worth picking those up, unless you got a few $1,000 and want to pick up the originals. The last thing I'm going to pick up, I'm ashamed to admit, I was, one of the phenomena that happened in the 80s and into the 90s where as soon as something was revealed, for example, Joker appearances during Dark Knight, Frank Miller's original, went crazy. People just, and of course it happened again when they revealed the Joker was the main villain in the Michael Keaton's movie. I think that was, 89? When they revealed Catwoman, Penguin, all these appearances pop up. Even obscure appearances like in Brave and Bold or Wonder Woman or DC Comic Presents. Also, when characters would get a new book, I mean, how did those original Animal Man appearances go up as soon as there was an Animal Man #1 that came out? And that was pre-Vertigo, but even though it was Grant Morrison doing it. Fool Killer would show up, and all of a sudden the Defender run would get expensive, and all these others. So there was always a hot comic. I mean, and sometimes they just came out of the blue. why Brother Power the Geek became a hot comic during the 80s and 90s, I'm not even sure. I mean, this was before he appeared as I think it was a Neil Gaiman written story in Swamp Thing.
Yep.
And, but I owned them. I owned them. I owned a Night Nurse for a while, although that was the 70s. So, I mean, I could go back. I'm not going to bore you with a list, but that one comes to immediate mind. As soon as a comic became hot, I had an obsession with getting a copy of it. And as soon as I got it, aka the Dark Shadows, they were hot, I would turn around and, I got it, so I sold it. It took me a while to get off that. I mean, it was just like a badge of pride. And this was before eBay, remember. This is not, now it's like, oh, well, Cousin It number 2 is hot. Okay, I'll go to eBay, go find myself a copy. In fact, I was talking with my dentist the other day because his son is telling him about investing in comics. Because with all these characters in the movies, there's another boom in first appearances. I mean, who thought New Mutants 98 would be a $400+ comic in near mint shape? And I was telling him, yeah, well, it's not that these are out. You got to start picking these up. I mean, you got to pick up like the New Mutants. That's the first Daredevil. Find yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 graded, the most highest you can get. Buy it, sit on it. Same thing with Hulk 181, although that one might be too late because that's already in the thousands. Strange Tales 180, first Gamora, if I believe I got that right. And I found this out when I was selling my stuff on the eBays, and all of a sudden, I said one sold, first Gamora. Go find yourself a mint copy, sit on it. The dentist later on, when I talked to him the next day, said, my son was really impressed. I came back with all this stuff. He's like, oh, you actually understand what I was saying. So, yeah, I got to admit, I was a sucker for the hot comics, and I owned me Brother Power the Geek. Totally unreadable. Although if I was DC and it would start to be hot, I would have just republished that baby in a quick throwaway flyer. And they do that constantly. I mean, I was just looking through some stuff, and I ran across a $1 thing they did where they had the first issue of Constantine and then the first issue of Hellblazer for $1. I mean, why not do that? They have a little fun, and especially when you see something like that going up in price. So I succumbed to the hot comics thing,
which probably is a good idea since you owned hot comics.
Well, this was actually before hot comics and Turrets too, But
well, who's also hot?
Oh, Emma Thompson, Christine Hendricks. Who played Starbucks in the new Battlestar Galactica?
Joe, I'm going to break your heart here.
What?
You really shouldn't call it the new Battlestar Galactica because it started 12 years ago.
But she's still hot.
Well, yeah, she's still hot. But no, these guys, our sponsors. That's right, here at the Solitaire Rose Radio Network, we have ads, and our first sponsor is me. That's right, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. I have my first book out with Dangerous Dan Moore. It's the first 100 strips of our online web strip, Worldwide News, the story of the lowest rated cable news network. And you can get yourself a copy with commentary, with all sorts of extras, with signatures and everything. Just email Dan over at lordshadowflame@gmail.com. Our top sponsor, who's been with us since day one, is DreamHost. DreamHost.com. You need yourself a website, and DreamHost.com is the #1 web host in the whole known universe. Just head over to DreamHost.com, put in the code KRAYZ, KRAYZ, get $20 off your first year. How can you beat that? Our other sponsor is Graze, GRAZE.com. Healthy snacks for a healthy lifestyle. Just head over to Graze, put in the code CORYS3R5P. Your first and fifth box are free. You could get them weekly. You could get them bi-weekly. You could get them monthly. You could just order a whole bunch of them. It's great stuff to keep you away from the vending machine at work. Now, if you would like to leave a comment for any of the podcasts that we do, we'd love those. Go ahead and email us at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, or you can call 952-856-0519. Operators are standing by. Okay, it's just a place that will record your calls, but we'll play them on the air. We'll answer your questions. We love getting feedback. Tell us what you think. Ask a question. Suggest a topic. be a guest. Send us your stuff. SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. If you would like to advertise on any of the Solitaire Rose radio shows, you can. Just email us at SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. Subject advertising. Thanks.
Hang on a second. I want to look up the actor's name.
I think her first name's Katie.
Yeah.
And after we do that, we do the plugs for the all the stuff on the Solitaire Rose network. So, the Novelcast and Bad Advice and Solitaire Rose Radio and Series in Review and Dave and Stephanie Kofel's Scrabbling Across the West. Joe! What's going on the eBays?
I can't find her name. Katie Sork. That's it. Aha, I found it. Meanwhile, on the eBays, I'm continuing to go through what's left of my collection and putting stuff up. Give you an example of some of the things that I just sold recently. I mentioned the SpongeBob comic earlier from Bongo/United Plankton. I sold a DC Legacy number 4, which was a Joe Kubert variant cover. Shrugged number 0, the B. Michael Turner variant cover out of 2006 from Aspen. We talked a bit about those, don't throw away any of your freebies, because that Dark Horse Legend ash can from 1996, it's worth about $5-10, depending on the day you sell it. I mean, it's got Hellboy, Star Slammers, Monster Men in it. Way back from 1977, we were talking some DC crossovers, and if you remember the Shazam Mighty Isis TV show, she had her own series, of course, from DC. Again, one's hard to find in really good shape, but if you can find them in that's so you can actually sell them pretty well. And from Dynamite, speaking of classic Battlestar Galactica, I sold a run of 1 through 12 with the annual. And reason I mention all this, because most of these people came to me and they said, Joe, you're a little expensive on that. Would you take this best offer? And unless you're really trying to lowball me, a lot of times I will. And of course, you, as a valued listener of this here podcast, if you do win something and you tell me that you did win, I'll toss in something, a good freebie. Could be a copy of the Worldwide News, the good book that Dan Moore and that shy man Corey Strode done did. Could be something else. Could be, well, let's see what I got over here. I grabbed this, here's a Doctor Who sticky notes. Or maybe this set of Chrome cards, playing cards from Disney World. I got tons of stuff, and it'll be showing up on eBay. And I try to put on stuff weekly. Just stop by, KRAYZ. If you're a www guy, you can go to stores.ebay.com/crazycomics and stuff, or go to Corey's website for Solitaire Rose, and he's gracious enough to put a direct link right to it. Come get some. And whatever you do, just don't tell Corey that, okay? Because he'll be bad, okay? So that's between you and me. Anyways, that's what's on the eBay today. Let's see. Are you back yet?
Yes, I'm back.
Oh, welcome back.
Is there anything that I'm going to be able to blackmail you about on the period when I was gone?
Well, let's just say you now have a bunch of people that'll be able to blackmail you.
Well, after Joe does his eBay stuff, we get to my favorite part of the show. No, not where I talk about how I read Get Lost, the old 50s Mad knockoff, while I was in the restroom. No, it's Freaking and Geeking. Joe, what are you freaking on?
It's really too soon. It's only been 3 days.
I know.
Well, I will tell you, though, there are a couple things. I do got to warn you folks, you probably run across this whole Facebook engineering thing. I play a lot of Facebook games. Well, actually, not a lot. The two I play right now are Train Station and Island Adventure. So if you happen to be playing that, send me a friend request and we can, swap whatever we need to do to play it. But I know Corey gets this constantly. You just get this gorgeous young babe with almost no friends that just wants to be your friend. Well, I accidentally clicked on one of these once. Because
really?
I went through and, usually what I do is I'll look and see, why is this person clicking me? And sometimes it'll be, okay, well, they listen to the podcast because they got Corey as a friend and a bunch of mutual friends. With, in case of some of the games, I'll see those people's names come up, and so I'll click on it. Well, this one came up. It had people's names from the games. Click on it. Right away, I get an instant message. Hi, how you doing? And I'm like thinking, oh, okay, well, usually I am somebody and just say, can you send me this or do this in the game? And I said, I'm doing okay. And then the next question is, where do you live? And I'm thinking, well, I live up in Minnesota. Not that big a question. The next question is what tipped me off. What's your birthday? Folks, never give that information out. When I worked at they call it the ID call center. If you show up at the line at the airport without ID, even if you got nothing, they have this process whereby you can give certain information, and when I was there, I could look up using commercial databases all the information. And I've talked about it in past. There used to be a firm called Accurant. I don't know if it's still there. $100 a month, you can look up anything on anybody. All you need is their name and some other vital piece of information, of which birthday is a key one. With that, it goes through 1,000, if not 1,000,000 different databases on the internet and gives me a synopsis of who it thinks you are. Not always accurate, because when I was doing this, you were allowed to do your own name, because they don't want you just, randomly looking up pieces. You've seen people get in trouble for this when they're like, yeah, DMV's looking up really hot-looking women on their driving records, which is really no-no when you're entrusted with that type of information. So I look at my information and I'm thinking, well, let's see, they got my dad's birthday down as mine. But they got all sorts of information, like my original address, where I lived at home, all the information from Crazy Comics, all the information from Hot Comics. So for those of you that are into internet privacy, guess what? It's too late. It's out there. However, these people will social engineer you, like this gorgeous-looking woman's just like, oh, yeah, talk to me. If I give her my birthday, she's got enough information to open up a fucking credit card. This is why I always cringe when people are online saying, oh, well, nobody gave me birthday responses. Folks, I don't have my birthday listed on Facebook. And if I do, it's February 29th, 1901. So there's no way you can figure out what it is. You got your birthday on there. You should probably hide it. Hide where you work. You shouldn't put where you live, because people can engineer that. You've heard people talking about, oh, I've seen fake posts from people. I'm not talking become a recluse and make everything private and be secretive, but just be aware. That's how people social engineer you into giving away stuff. That's why Cory hides all day long in the Solitaire Rose compound, because as soon as he goes out, he has all these large-breasted redheads with pie trying to get his bank account number. Silly redheads.
Yeah, so I did that careful. Once and learned my lesson. Wait, was that out loud?
Oh, was that a redhead? Wait a minute.
Yeah, she dyed her hair. Wait, what?
Huh? No, not a
redhead.
What? Huh? What are you telling me you need new drapes in here? Anyways, just be careful with that. Needless to say, I defriended her, I blocked her, I might even reported it. It was just bogus. So sorry. And women too, these young, gorgeous, hot things are not really into you. The other thing we need, and this was something very, very sad. Maybe touch a little cloth on it. There's a serious, serious problem, and our podcast is part of it. There was a new report that just came out that over 250 million Americans still need guests on their podcasts this week. Very sad. We are scrambling to find someone to appear on our podcast as guests that we would normally book either on last week's episode or too busy hosting their own shows. I've been trying to get my brother-in-law, and he's just too busy because he's watching Mad Men and probably doing on somebody else's guest host buddy podcast. I'm telling you, this is a serious, serious problem. And you know how I know it's a problem, Cory?
How?
It was in the Onion. It's gotta be true. Gotta be true. So if you, especially if you're a comic artist, want to be on this here podcast, get a hold of us. Hell, even if you just want to hear your name on the interwebs, we'll fill a hour somehow. See, I told you, it was only 3 days. I really got nothing to freak on. Cory, what are you freaking on these past 3 days?
Well, springing off what you say, the the pretty young ladies who send you the friend requests, and then when you look at their profile, it's, add me on this dating site. They're showing pictures of their butts rather than their boobs. And that really upsets me, because I'm not really a butt guy. Joe, what are you geeking on?
Let's see. We talked a little bit on the Kickbook thing. Steve the Root Dude and I believe Mike Barron were doing a Nexus omnibus, but events conspired against them where they weren't able to do it. And as part of the try to follow up and just get things closed, they sent a note saying, well, you know, what do you want to do? And I said, send me a hardcover reprint. And they just sent me a notice that's in the mail. So I'm kind of excited about that. I'm kind of excited. We got Halloween coming up. I'm not quite sure what's going on. Chris and I are waffling between staying home and giving away. I'll probably run over to the source, see if I can pick up some of those Halloween event comics that they're giving out. I've seen tons of shops in the Twin Cities have their Halloween Fest event in the last couple of days, where you could go and pick up the Halloween Quest comics for there, which is kind of like free comic book day, but more Halloween themed. I didn't go to any because I was basically just using this time off to do the eBays, you know, which we've already talked about. So other than that, that's pretty much. Oh, I did have one thing that I did read. Speaking of old Ditko and stuff, I picked me up the reprint paperback Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, The Way to Dusty Death. This is one of those themed books that Marvel comes out with their trade paperbacks. I know I picked up like the Thor versus Hercules one, and what they do is they reprint all different fights between Hercules and Thor all the way back from the beginning to forward. This one's kind of cool because it deals with the villain. I can't find his name. Oh, Xandu, the sorcerer Xandu. He's desperate to restore the love of his life to the land of the dead. Appeared way back in Amazing Spider-Man. Sorry, I can't even talk. Amazing Spider-Man Annual Number 2, The Wondrous Worlds of Doctor Strange, where Stan Lee and Steve Ditko put it together. It goes forward, and I'm telling you, I'm trying to read this stuff, and they publish like black ink on black covers. They go from there to Marvel Team Up, the next appearance 21, and then 50 to 50, and 76 to 77, and 80 to 81, and then they do the Spider-Man Doctor Strange one-shot, The Way to Dusty Death, which I had sitting in my pile to be read. But to tell you the truth, had I read it, I'd have been mightily lost because I had no idea who Xandu was until I read this book. It continues on to Untold Tales of Spider-Man, Strange Encounters, and also includes stuff from Marvel Fanfare 6. That was actually, I think Frank Miller had a piece of that. Fantastic read. I mean, if you've never read it, it's a lot of fun. It kind of is neat the way they just take a character and just kind of follow along what's going on. It's Amazing Spider-Man 14. That was the one where Denny O'Neil and Frank Miller did it, and Frank Miller did the art. You think Ditko does some funky art? Well, wait till you see Frank Miller doing it. So, highly recommended book, worth reading. Most of the material was new, except for the Marvel Team-Up stuff, which I picked up a lot when I was a kid. Other than that, just, you know, colder than hell outside, so I'm just staying indoors. How about you, Corey?
I have not had time to read any comics, sadly, since Thursday.
Well, to be fair, I read that was just something I forgot off last week. So,
but Friday, when I woke up Friday morning, I was at work from Friday morning till Saturday afternoon, and then Saturday afternoon, I had to get a new car. And you're wondering why with you saying that way, is that in the geeking? Well, everybody hates going to car dealers. Everybody hates going to car dealers. But I, on the other hand, did all my homework. When I took the car in because it was losing radiator fluid and coolant and everything, about a week ago, they looked it over and said, well, we can't find anything, so it's going to be one of two things, and it's going to cost a couple $100 to find out which it is. Either your head gasket has gone bad, or you need a new water pump. And the head gasket will be $1,800. And the water pump, it's only a $40 part, but it's about 10 hours worth of labor. So that will be around $1,500.
Wait a minute. This is sounding more like a freaking here. Are we getting somewhere?
Yes. So last Saturday, I just decided, that's it. I'm not paying that much on the car. It's went over the amount that I said that I would spend on repairs. So I went and I looked online. I did research. I decided on the kind of car I want. I went to one of the dealership's website, and I saw the car, and I said, I would like to buy this car. I'll be doing it at Saturday. And I got an email, and they had knocked $4,000 off the price. Now, Joe asked me, why did they knock $4,000 off the price?
Because it came without wheels?
No, because the 2018, this is the 2017 Kia Rio. The 2018 Kia Rio comes out on November 4th. So they got to get these off, basically, once the 2018 comes out, nobody
they're in a bind because they're way behind. They're willing to make a deal.
So they were ready to dump it, and they sent me an email saying this will be the price. And then I went on their website, and I gave them all my financial information so they could run the numbers, and I could just walk in and be done. And all I really needed to do was test drive the car. So I come in, and the car salesman was, he wanted to do all this stuff, and I said, nope, here's this, and I just want to test drive the car. And he said, oh, do you want to take it out on the freeway? Do you want to do this? I said, no, I read the reviews online, and the reviews online talked about one of the problems with the car was that road noise. And road noise when you're going about 60 on the interstate is not a big deal. It's when you're on side streets and stuff like that. That's when a car is going to be noisier. So we drove it for about a mile and a half on side streets, different speeds and everything. Not a lot of road noise. So we brought it back, and I said, I want the car. And, they try to upsell you on all the other packages, the rust proofing. Every car that comes to Minnesota has under rust proofing. They kind of have to. All these other things, and I just kept saying no. And an hour and a half later, I walked out with a new car, Trish the Stratus, which I have had for a decade. I got $1 for. I got a shiny new $1 for my old car, Joe.
Nice.
Because he was ready for me to go, the car is worth this much, and he was all ready to talk me down. He was like, well, I see that you've got some tape here, and you've got this, and I said, look, I know the car's not worth anything. I know it's going to need a lot of work. That's why I'm getting rid of it.
And what they'll do is they turn around and sell it to a junkyard for parts for $300.
Yeah. So, they made a little money off it. There are parts on the car that are still good. The tires are all brand new. But, yep, I've got a brand new, first time I have ever bought a brand new car. The car right now, because I had to drive it to work last night, has 52 miles on it. It's got where it can pair up with my phone. It's got the satellite radio. It's got the Bluetooth. It's got all sorts of bells and whistles for only $13,500. So that's what I'm geeking on. I don't have to worry about car repair, paying for car repair, for 100,000 miles.
Woohoo!
So from now on, I might be driving when we go places.
Although I still like my truck because you get to sit up higher.
Yeah, and the back seat's not that big for Butch.
Yeah, and people don't challenge you as much when you have a truck.
Although, for what is considered a little car, because I've had little cars. I had 2 Chevettes and a Geo Metro. This is more like a shorter sedan. It doesn't feel like a little bitty car when you're driving it either. But it gets the same mileage as the Geo Metro used to get, so I'm kind of happy about that.
Cool.
Movie-wise, Filmstruck, which is that thing between Criterion Film and Turner Classic Movies. First off, they invited me into their, I don't even know what the darn thing is called. the Inner Circle. So what that is, they're going to be polling certain members to say, what kind of movies are you looking for? What are you watching? What do you do? What do you like best? What don't you like? Things like that. But on Filmstruck, they've added a whole bunch of stuff for Halloween, including 8 Mario Bava films and a bunch of other European horror films. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. And then I finally watched some of the DVDs, the Universal Legacy DVDs, because I had time. So I watched Dracula's Daughter. Joe, have you heard of Dracula's Daughter, the first sequel to Dracula?
You know, I went out with a girl that gave hickeys like Dracula's Daughter, but no, I haven't.
It was probably better in the movie because, oh, man, I can see why they took a while to make another sequel to Dracula after this one, because it was unbelievably slow, really, really slow. And it's funny how, you know, the first sequel to Frankenstein's probably better than Frankenstein, but the first sequel to Dracula was, oh, yeah, I could have had a nap and had better entertainment. But, yeah, I've got time to watch movies today because we're recording this on Sunday, so I'm going to be cleaning up around the house because I haven't really been in my house for the last week, and watching some movies. Maybe even read a comic book or two.
Whoa, don't get carried away.
Well, we've got like over a week before the next episode, so I'll have a lot of comics read by now.
Yeah, and maybe Box Day will show up.
Maybe. Well, believe it or not, kids, you've listened to us blather on about funny books for over an hour. Maybe even close to an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And as we say every week, the comics we like the least, we still like better than the comics that you like the most. Joe?
I've decided we are going to end the episode with a quick Ask the Strode.
Now, I want to institute something from now on.
Okay.
When we do an Ask the Strode, or we do a Does Joe Know, if you get the question right...
Oh, you get a cookie.
No, you get a shiny new dime.
I don't have any shiny dimes.
Well, because you're always complaining that you don't get paid to be on the show. Well, now you getting paid to be on the show is up to you.
I've worked commission. It sucks.
So whenever I ask, what does Joe know, which I'll be doing more often.
Fair is fair.
If you get it right, you get a shiny new dime.
Which doesn't mean anything, folks, because I see Cory. I mean, he would even come over for the offer of IHOP pancakes to show me his new car.
That's because I had to go to work.
Oh, excuses.
I had to get paid rather than pay.
And I would even be willing to share my last bottle of Rat Bastard root beer with him.
I still have 12.
Yeah, I just got the one. Okay, here it is. Ask the Strode. For a dime.
For a shiny new dime.
Why did Stan Lee put a hyphen in Spider-Man's name? I didn't tell you it was going to be easy, did you?
No, it shouldn't be for a dime. Because I know in some of the stories he actually wrote it as Spider-Man without the hyphen. But I do not know. Wait. So it wouldn't get confused with Superman.
Bingo! Cory nails it. Hit my music.